Boldwood presents Take Me Home to Kelsea Sands, written by Sharon and read by Catherine Harvey. Chapter 1. "Well, Alison," the nurse said cheerfully, "your blood pressure's definitely up since your last health check. We're going to have to do something about that, aren't we?" She released the pressure from the arm cuff, and Alison slumped in the chair, relieved that it was over, even if the results weren't what she'd hoped. She hated having her blood pressure monitored. "Oh, it makes me feel a bit queasy," she told the nurse. "That horrible tightening on my arm is so uncomfortable. You know, I'm pretty sure it's that which sends my blood pressure soaring. Bet it's much lower, really." "Yes, a lot of people say that," the nurse replied. "White coat syndrome, isn't it funny?" Hilarious. "Well, that's you done for today, my love. If you give us a ring in a few days, we'll have the results of your blood tests for you and let you know if you need an appointment. Have you still got your own BP machine at home?" As Alison nodded, she said, "Smashing. Well, in the meantime, can you monitor your blood pressure for us over the next 4 days and let us know the readings? Then we'll discuss whether you need your medication increasing. OK?" It wasn't really a question. Alison was dismissed. She nodded her thanks and stumbled out of the consulting room, feeling as deflated as the cuff that now lay, harmless-looking, on the nurse's desk. You'd never believe it could grip with such ferocity. Bloody thing. She gave a half-hearted smile to the receptionist, then hurried out of the building, eager to get as far away from the place as possible. She dreaded visiting the surgery. Doctors and nurses and monitors and tests. Unfortunately, it was January, which meant it was her birthday month and time for her annual health check. She'd skipped it last year and had hoped she could get away with it this year too, but there'd been a few text messages from the surgery, and even the chemist had pointed out to her that there was a note on her prescription saying she needed to book an appointment before she could get any more blood pressure tablets. There had been no escape. At least it was over with now, she thought, as she unlocked the car door and slid into the driver's seat, glad to get out of the drizzle that had persisted all afternoon. Slamming the door shut, she took a deep breath and leaned back against the headrest for a moment, closing her eyes as she tried to still the panic. "It's done," she murmured. "The worst bit's over with now." Except she knew that wasn't true, because she still had to take her own blood pressure for 4 days, and it was an ordeal she really wasn't looking forward to. And then there was the waiting for the blood test results. "Don't think about it now," she said firmly. "Come on, let's go home. I'll treat you to a posh coffee and a slice of that Victoria sponge." She wondered vaguely if anyone else had conversations out loud with themselves. Maybe it was just her. One thing to talk to yourself in your mind, but to say it out loud? "I think you might be a bit daft," she told her reflection in the rearview mirror as she wrestled with the seatbelt. "Hey, me too," it replied. She shook her head, laughing, and started the car. At least she had the whole evening to herself tonight. No late shift at the petrol station, no babysitting duties. Just the latest episode of her favourite soap and a few chapters of the book she'd been trying to read for the last 3 weeks. And a bath, she decided, as she navigated her way out of the car park and onto the main road. Not a shower, a nice long soak in the tub with my posh bubble bath, and maybe even candles. She knew it would never happen. She'd seen it in the films, but had never actually had a soak with candles around the bath in her life, and probably wouldn't start now. Besides, her hair really needed washing, and a shower was so much quicker. The drive home took forever. Rush hour, with the world and its wife making their way home after a hard day's graft. She'd managed to leave work a couple of hours early so she could go to the doctor's, but had forgotten about the busy main roads through Hull at tea time. She finally pulled up outside her house, 35 minutes after leaving the surgery, on what should have been a 10-minute drive. She was feeling frazzled and anxious, and had no doubt that her blood pressure had just climbed to even greater heights. Why are some drivers such morons? She wondered aloud as she unclipped her seatbelt, reached for her bag, and finally stepped out onto the pavement. "There you are, stranger. Thought you were never coming home." For a split second, Alison thought the voice was her daughter's, and her heart sank. But it was only Rosie, sitting on the doorstep, the light from the wall lamp revealing her beaming face as Alison moved closer. God, she thought, what an awful way to feel about my own daughter. I'm a horrible person, I really am. "What are you doing here?" She couldn't help smiling as her cousin jumped to her feet. It was hard not to smile when Rosie was around. "I've been sat on your doorstep for bloody ages," Rosie told her. She peered round at her behind and said, "Is my arse wet? Just have a look for us, will you?" She spun round so Alison could check the back of her jeans. "No, you're fine," Alison reassured her, resisting the urge to correct Rosie's grammar and tell her she'd actually been sitting on the doorstep. All those years of teaching, she supposed. Hard habit to break, but not a very likeable one, especially as she hardly spoke with perfect grammar herself, despite her writing skills. She unlocked the front door and switched on the hallway light. "Go on in. I'll put the kettle on. You still haven't said why you're here." "Well, why do you think?" Rosie held up a carrier bag and shook it. "Your birthday cards. Belated happy birthday, Ali." Alison paused in the act of hanging up her coat and stared at her. "You never came all this way just to bring me those." "What else was I supposed to do? We felt awful. We thought we beat your mum and dad's last weekend, so we all left your cards there, and then you didn't turn up, so—" "Hey, you've got prezzies too. There's even one in there for Mum and Dad. Mind you, I wouldn't like to guess what it is. You know what Mum's like." She grinned, and Alison grinned back. She adored her cousin and always felt cheerier in her presence. At 43, Rosie was 19 years younger than Alison and was a lively, bubbly woman with a glorious mop of thick, wavy, strawberry blonde hair that tumbled over her shoulders and large, heavily made-up blue eyes that usually twinkled with humour. Despite the weather, she was wearing tight jeans, trendy trainers, and a denim jacket. Alison, whose own fine, light brown hair wouldn't know what a wave was, usually kept her style simple by putting it in a ponytail or a bun, and her eyes, although blue, like most of her family's, were pale like her dad's and uncle's, rather than the vibrant blue Rosie and her brother boasted. At 5'3", she was an inch taller than Rosie, but while the younger woman's curves were in proportion, Alison was most definitely pear-shaped. Her flat chest and broad hips had been the bane of her life. In short, Alison had every reason to envy her cousin. But she didn't. She couldn't muster a single negative thought about her. When Rosie was born, Alison had been at university, though still living at home, and she'd been all too keen to babysit for extra money. She'd watched her cousin grow up, and for most of the time she'd been fond of her, apart from the tricky teenage years when Rosie had really got on Alison's nerves for a while. When Alison became a mum herself, it was Rosie's turn to babysit as soon as she was old enough. Alison would get home from wherever she'd been, usually with her husband, Drew, and while he'd wander into the living room to give them space, she'd sit in the kitchen and listen to Rosie's latest news, her joys, her woes, her worries and secrets. And Alison began confiding in Rosie too, and discovered her cousin had become a good listener. Over the years, Alison had come to feel that Rosie was the sister she would have loved to have. Having her as a cousin was the second best thing. Impulsively, she threw her arms around Rosie and hugged her. Rosie blinked. Oh, bloody hell, what's up with you? I've missed you, and it's so good of you to come all this way to bring my birthday cards. I'm a saint, me. Rosie gave her a worried look. Are you okay, Ali? Yeah, of course. Alison hurried through to the kitchen, where she immediately flicked the light and the kettle on and pulled 2 mugs from the cupboard. Isn't the weather miserable? Bloody drizzle all afternoon. Sick to death of grey skies, aren't you? Well, you can't expect anything else in January, Rosie pointed out, sitting at the table. Never sunbathed in the new year in my life. Oh, your kitchen's lovely and warm. She gazed around, an appreciative look on her face. I do love your house. Are you still at your mum and dad's? Or have you gone back to the caravan? Alison queried. Still at mum and dad's. Rosie wrinkled her nose. Park doesn't open again until the 1st of February. Bit of a pain, but there you go. Oh, of course. I don't know how you cope in a caravan through the winter, Alison said, shivering at the thought of it. You know, I've offered before, but I'll say it again. I've got a spare room. You can always come and live here with me, you know. I'm sure you could get a job locally. You'd be very welcome. Oh, I know, and it's really good of you, but I've spent enough time away from Kelsea Sands. I don't want to leave again. Besides, I've had enough of living in a city, thanks all the same. 20 years in Sheffield with Craig was enough. Too far from the sea for my liking. And the Humber. Alison nodded. 20 years had been more than enough for her, too. She'd missed Rosie so much during those years, even though they'd spoken on the phone regularly and visited each other at least once a month. Of course, they both had other friends, but it wasn't the same. She'd been relieved when Rosie came home, although sad for her that her long-term relationship had ended. I'm hardly far from the Humber myself, she pointed out, and it's only a 15-minute drive to the sea. It was the one thing she'd insisted upon when they'd bought this house. She wanted a view of the river, and this new estate, on the site of an old dock, had been the perfect compromise if she couldn't live in Kelsea Sands. Yeah, but you know what I mean. Alison nodded, understanding. The air was different in a city. Any city. You could breathe properly in Kelsea Sands. Given the choice, she knew where she'd rather be. And if it hadn't been for Drew's job in the west of the city and the heavy traffic going across the River Hull at rush hour every morning and evening, she'd have insisted that they buy in the village, or at least as close to it as possible. Her heart lay in the countryside of Holderness, and always would. This remote area of East Yorkshire, edged on one side by the North Sea and by the Yorkshire Wolds on the other, with the Humber estuary marking its southern boundary, was the only place she ever felt truly at home. Even so, she didn't like to think of Rosie staying in a caravan, as nice as it was, not in winter. Tides Reach Caravan Park was open 11 months of the year, so its residents were sent packing on the 31st of December and not allowed back until January was over, something to do with its licensing conditions, according to Gavin Hewson, who owned it. Since Rosie had broken up with Craig 4 years ago, she'd spent every January at her parents' house, just across the road from the park. They'd offered to let her live there permanently, but she refused. She'd rather have her own space, even if it was a caravan. Still, it was handy to have a permanent address, and they clearly didn't mind her using theirs. Them next door but one from you have still got their Christmas decks up. Have you noticed? Bad luck, that, Rosie said, nodding knowingly. Should have taken them down on Monday, at the latest, and here we are on Friday. Wouldn't like to be in their shoes. Hey, you're a bit late home from work, aren't you? She added, glancing at the clock on the wall as Alison handed her a mug of tea, strong, with 2 sugars, just as she liked it. The clock was shaped like a chicken, and Alison had bought it about 30 years ago, when she'd had a sudden and inexplicable desire to decorate her kitchen like a rural farmhouse. All the other things from that era had long since been replaced with something more suited to a home on a reasonably modern estate, but the chicken clock had stayed. Alison couldn't really say why. "I've been to the doctor's," Alison admitted, wondering why she'd shared that information. It would have been much easier to say that the traffic had been bad. She put her own mug of tea on a coaster with shaking hands. Rosie's expression changed to one of concern. "Are you all right? Nothing's wrong, is it?" "No, honestly, everything's fine. Well..." Alison blinked away sudden tears. "I mean, I think it is. Mostly." She turned away and rummaged in the cupboard. "Cake?" "Always," Rosie confirmed. "But what aren't you telling me, Ali?" Alison carried 2 small plates, each holding a slice of cake and a fork, and placed them carefully on the table before taking a seat next to Rosie. "I swear, it's nothing. Just a routine health check, with it being my birthday month." Her eyes drifted to the carrier bag that Rosie had propped against her chair leg, and without warning, she burst into tears. "Oh, God!" Rosie put her arm around Alison's shoulders and pulled her closer. "Oh, what is it? What's happened? You can tell me, you know. Mind my cake," she added hastily, nudging the plate away as Alison's elbow moved scarily close to her precious Victoria sponge. "What did the doctor say?" "It was the nurse," Alison said with a sniff. "It's not about that anyway. Well, not really. My blood pressure was up a bit, and I've gained another 7 pounds since I last got weighed, and I got told off, like I was a naughty kid." Rosie nodded wisely. "They're trained to talk to you like that, you know. Did she call you Poppet? I'd have had words if she did." Through all her tears, Alison couldn't help but laugh. "No, she was really nice, to be fair. It's me. I feel so washed up. I'm 62. "I know," Rosie said. "It was your birthday the other day, remember?" "Are you going to open your cards, or are you going to cry all over your cake? 'Cause that's a crime, if you ask me. It looks ever so nice." She gazed longingly at her plate. "Can I stop hugging you now? I'm starving." She gave Alison a wink. Alison shook her head. "What are we like? Yeah, let's have the cake. Although I shouldn't, by rights. The nurse will have a fit." "Oh, bugger it," Rosie said. She ignored the fork and picked the cake up in her hands, taking a big bite and chewing blissfully. This is gorgeous," she managed eventually. "M&S?" "Maesters," Alison told her. She scooped some cake up on her fork and began to tuck in. Sod her blood pressure. "So?" Rosie said a few minutes later, when the cake had been safely devoured. "What's with the tears?" She licked her fingers and sighed. "I must pop into Maesters on the way home." "I was just being stupid," Alison told her. She reached over and opened the kitchen drawer. "Here, have a baby wipe." "Trust you to have baby wipes handy. You're so organised." Rosie wiped her hands gratefully. "Thanks, love." "Oh, I don't feel very organised," Alison admitted. "I feel as if everything's falling apart, to be honest. Me, most of all." "Just because you've turned 62? It's only a number. I don't remember you getting all upset about turning 60. Surely that was a bigger deal." "I'm on the fast lane to 70 now," Alison said bleakly. "It's all downhill from now on." "It's all downhill from 29, if you ask me," Rosie said with a shrug. "You can't let it bother you. What does it matter? At least we're alive." Alison sighed. "I've got a whisker on my chin," she admitted at last. "One wiry, dark whisker. I keep having to pluck it out." Rosie giggled. "It's not funny. What if it's just the first? I'll end up looking like Father Christmas." "Not if your whiskers are dark. You might end up looking like Hagrid, though." "Thanks for that." "What's really bothering you?" Rosie queried. "Life," Alison said, with another heavier sigh. I often wonder what Drew would think of me, wasting it away like this. Bless him, Rosie said. He was a lovely fella. He was, and he didn't deserve. Nobody does, Rosie said gently, squeezing Alison's hand. But that's life, isn't it? Do you know, it was 9 years in November. Can you believe that? I've been a widow for 9 whole years. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you, Rosie told her, for what felt like the millionth time. I tried to get back as often as I could, but I wish I'd lived closer. You were brilliant, Alison assured her. You all were. I'd have been lost without you. Her mum and dad had been towers of strength. Rosie had popped back from Sheffield as often as she could and had kept in touch by phone and text. Her aunt and uncle, Elaine and Christopher, had been quietly supportive, and her cousin Niall, Rosie's brother, had tried very hard not to be so vicarish and be more cousinish as he'd consoled and comforted her. Although he'd switched back to vicar mode when he'd performed the funeral service in his church, and a beautiful job he'd done too. All in all, she couldn't complain about any of them. She knew she was lucky to have them all. Maybe I shouldn't have given up teaching, she mused, not really meaning it. You'd got completely fed up of teaching, Rosie reminded her. You did the right thing. But that was before I knew Drew was going to die, and before I knew I was going to be left all alone. If you really wanted to go back to teaching, you'd have done so afterwards. But you didn't, did you? You took that job at the petrol station. Don't you like it? Alison shrugged. I don't mind it, I suppose. It's easy, and the people are friendly. And it's on the same retail park where Drew used to work. So I feel closer to him there. It's just that I can imagine Drew telling me I should be doing something more with my life than this. Like what? Oh, I don't know. I can't help thinking how he died so young, Rosie, while I got all this extra life. Shouldn't I be doing something with it? For his sake, if nothing else. Not being funny, Rosie said, but it won't make any difference to Drew what you're doing with your life. If you took up mountain climbing, became a nun, or spent your remaining years sitting in a corner eating donuts and quietly growing your Hagrid beard, it really wouldn't matter, would it? Drew wouldn't know one way or the other. Mind you, don't tell our Niall I said that, for God's sake. Alison spluttered with laughter. She could always rely on Rosie to tell it like it is. She had to admit that deep down, she shared her cousin's belief that Drew wouldn't have a clue what she was doing now. There was no Drew. Not anymore. Niall, bless him, had tried to comfort her with the assurance that his spirit had moved on somewhere, but she'd only nodded and smiled to please him. Drew was gone. That was half the trouble. They'd been together since their early 20s, and she couldn't say theirs had been a passionate love affair, the sort she'd read about in books and seen in films. It had been a quiet, steady companionship, really, but it had made them both happy enough, and she missed him. She missed his lively chatter and his smile, and the way he caught spiders for her and put them outside, and how he cheerfully emptied the bins so she didn't have to. He'd been a lovely husband and a wonderful dad to Jenna, who adored him. Even so, she knew he'd have kindly but firmly dealt with their daughter's demands. Jenna doesn't help, she said flatly. Rosie nodded. Still babysitting every spare minute? Yep. Don't get me wrong. I love Jenna so much, and I love Hallie and Ada. Of course I do. But sometimes I just wish I could have peace and quiet, you know? I seem to spend most of my time dashing from here to work, to school, or Jenna's house, to mind the kids, or to Kelsea Sands to see Mum and Dad. Speaking of your mum and dad, Rosie said, are you going to open your birthday cards? I guess so. Wow, don't sound too thrilled. Have you got so many cards you don't need any more? The tears welled up again, and Rosie groaned. Oh, now what have I said? Do you know what I got in the post for my birthday? Alison demanded. Surprise me. A bloody NHS bowel testing kit. That was my birthday post, can you imagine? Rosie grinned. How very thoughtful of them. Wasn't it? Alison said. They also texted me to remind me to book a cervical smear. Rosie burst out laughing and handed her the carrier bag. Alison decided she'd whinged enough and opened her cards. There was a lovely one from her parents, of course, and one from Uncle Christopher and Auntie Elaine, and one from Niall and his wife Kendra, plus a separate one from their children, Ryan and Poppy, and one from Rosie. Open your presents, Rosie urged. Mind you, don't get your hopes up. There was a necklace from her mum and dad, a beautiful scented candle from Niall and Kendra, chocolates from Ryan and Poppy, and a gift box of soaps from Elaine and Christopher. Old lady soaps, she said with a sigh. I know. Told you not to get your hopes up. Mind you, you are 62, Rosie said mischievously. I didn't get you a present as such, but I've written you a gift card. Look. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and handed Alison a note which read, I owe you 1 trip to the cinema with nachos and dips thrown in, or a night out in the pub, whichever's cheapest. Alison put her arms around her. You're a star, she told her. I know, Rosie shrugged. So, what are you going to do about your Jenna? What can I do? She works hard. Joel works hard. They need help with the girls, and they are my granddaughters. Well, can't they put some childcare in place? After school clubs or something? It's not fair dumping it all on you. Rosie's eyes twinkled with mirth. Not at your age. Alison nudged her. Watch it. Oh, it doesn't matter really. Except that I wanted to go home at the weekend, and I had to miss it to take the girls to a birthday party at some fun palace. I'd hoped I could just drop them off and make a getaway, but Jenna hadn't warned me we were expected to stay to supervise. She pulled the band from her hair, freeing her ponytail, and reflected how odd it was that, after all these years, she still thought of Kelsea Sands as home. Mum and Dad were very understanding, but I know they wanted me there, especially with it being my birthday week. Rosie looked suddenly awkward, and Alison's eyes narrowed in suspicion. What is it? Rosie squirmed in her chair. Sorry, Ali. Truth is, I didn't just come to bring you the birthday cards. We were going to ring you, but your mum wanted me to tell you in person because she knew you'd worry, and she said you'd never believe anyone unless you could see their face. Worry about what? Alison asked, her nerves already kicking in. Rosie gave her a pleading look. Now, don't get yourself all het up, but your mum's had an accident. A fall. She's all right, she added quickly, as Alison gasped. Well, mostly. What does mostly mean? She's broken her arm, Rosie admitted. Quite a nasty fracture, but you know your mam, she's staying cheerful. But she must have come to Hull to the hospital. Why didn't someone tell me? Dad tried, Rosie said. Mum stayed at the A&E department with your parents, and Dad drove here to put you in the picture and maybe take you to the hospital if you wanted to go. But you weren't in. He didn't know where to find you, so... When was this? Alison asked. Wednesday afternoon. Your mum said it was your afternoon off, but you must have been out. I was, Alison said grimly. I had to take Hallie to the dentist. Emergency filling. Joel and Jenna couldn't get away from work. Oh, well, there you go. Rosie looked sheepish suddenly. I'm sorry you're only just hearing about this. Truth is, I promised I'd come here to tell you yesterday, but I got an extra shift at the chippy last night and had to put off coming here. Your mum and dad are going to kill me when they find out. But look, don't worry about your mum, okay? But how will she manage? You know how useless Dad is. I'll pop in every day to make sure they have everything they need, Rosie promised. And so will Mum and Dad. And Seb's lad Sam has offered to pick up any shopping for them and take them to the hospital if needs be, or anything else they need doing. You know how kind he is. Alison stared at her, then promptly burst into tears. Not again. What's going on? Rosie patted her arm. Since you turned 62, I think you've developed a faulty valve and sprung a leak. She smirked. Good job it's only your eyes that are leaking, eh? Unless there's something else you haven't told me. Let's not even go there, Alison said, mopping her tears away with the sleeve of her jumper in a most unladylike manner. Poor Mum. It shouldn't be down to you, Elaine and Christopher, to look after her and Dad. And it definitely shouldn't be down to Sam. It should be me. I should be there for them. Oh, she gave an impatient shake of her head. Why are they so stubborn? Why do they have to stay in Kelsea Sands anyway at their age? I told them it's too remote. They should move somewhere closer to the shops and the doctor's surgery. There's not even a bus service there. I just told you. Sam's offered, Rosie told her. And there's me, if I'm not working, and Mum and Dad. Stop worrying, Ali. Like I said, they'll be fine. We'll make sure of it. I could stay with them, I would, Alison murmured. You know that, don't you? Of course, but you've got work and the grandkids. We get it. And I'll be down to see them on Sunday, Alison promised. I don't care if Jenna and Joel have other plans. I'm not changing my mind about this. Great, Rosie said. I'll probably see you there then. I better be getting off, she added, glancing once more at the clock. I hate driving in the dark as it is, and the road back isn't exactly straightforward, is it? Are you sure you want to go back tonight? Alison stared out of the window, her brow creasing with anxiety. It's raining faster now. You can stay here tonight if you like. Go back in the morning when it's light. Rosie tilted her head, thinking. Tempting, but you can call your parents. Let them know you're staying here. They won't worry then. I haven't got anything with me, though. I can lend you some pyjamas. They'll probably fit you better than they do me. At least you've got boobs to fill the top, and your hips won't strain the bottoms. And I have a new toothbrush in its packaging. You can have that. I suppose it's something different to write in my journal. If I stay, can we watch that new Harlan Coben thriller on Netflix? I'm proper hooked on his stuff. Really? Alison wrinkled her nose. She didn't like thrillers. They made her too tense and anxious. I suppose so, as long as you'll sit through Emmerdale first. Rosie groaned. Oh, no. You and your soaps. One soap, and it's not up for negotiation, Alison said firmly. I like the pretty scenery. Tell you what, I'll make you a posh coffee to help you get through it. Ooh, one of those caramel ones. And do we get a hot chocolate before bedtime? Naturally. She'd start the diet tomorrow. Rosie hesitated, clearly still not sure. And I still have loads of that cake left, Alison said slyly. Rosie grinned. Looks like you've got yourself a house guest for the night. Chapter 2. It was only 24 miles from her home to Kelsea Sands, but it still took Alison nearly an hour to get there, and that was going by the quickest route. Sometimes, if the weather was good and she had lots of time to spare, and the mood took her, she'd go a longer way round, via Sunk Island, to gaze at the little boats at Stone Creek and look out over the Humber to Lincolnshire. Across the water, she could see the port of Immingham, with its cranes and chimneys and bustling activity, It seemed a million miles away from this little haven of tranquility. It was a good place to walk along the riverbank, breathe in the fresh air and relax. Today, though, she had no time for relaxing. Her mum and dad were expecting her and, despite her objections, had informed her they were taking her to the North Star for Sunday dinner. She couldn't even remember the last time she'd been in the pub, even though it was only a few minutes' walk from her parents' home. When, she wondered, had life got so hectic? When Hallie and Ada had started school, she'd assumed that she wouldn't be needed so much for babysitting, but Jenna had begged her to take the twins to school on the mornings she wasn't working an early shift at the petrol station, and then she'd asked if Alison could pick them up afterwards and maybe take them home with her for a couple of hours because Jenna had so much work to do and it was far easier to get on with it while the twins weren't around. Alison worked alternate Saturdays and Sundays, and her weekend days should have been sacrosanct, as Jenna, who was also a teacher, didn't work then, and Joel only worked every other weekend at the large IT company he'd been with since leaving college. But somehow they both seemed to find things that needed doing. Joel was working overtime. He had a conference to attend. He was on a training course. Jenna had a pile of marking to get through. She had lessons to plan. She was feeling absolutely exhausted, and would Mum really mind? Somehow it had become normal. It was what happened. Jenna and Joel worked hard. Alison did the lion's share of the childcare, whether the girls were at school or not. It wasn't fair, and Alison knew it was time she did something about it. She just didn't know what. She loved Hallie and Ada with all her heart, but she was tired. She needed a break. Besides, the twins should spend more time with their mum and dad, just as Alison should with hers. She put all thoughts of her daughter and granddaughters aside for a moment as she passed Kelsea wetlands, acres of grasslands, freshwater lakes and saltwater lagoons, which provided a haven for birds and other wildlife, and drove along Weltringham Road. On impulse, she drove past Sanderling's, her parents' detached red brick bungalow, and rounded the corner, heading towards the beach. At the end of the road, she pulled into the little car park and turned off the engine. She needed to breathe in the sea air and shake off the dust of the city. Alison made her way with some difficulty over the mound of grass and sand that formed a feeble barrier between the car park and the beach, and stood, hands on hips, gazing out to the sea. The wide, open sky was vast above her, stretching out to meet the horizon, where she could see the wind turbines off the coast of nearby Weltringham. It was one of those crisp, cold, cloudless, though blustery, January days that made her feel grateful to be alive. She turned her head to the left, where the crumbling cliffs began. There, the road she'd just driven down ended abruptly. Bits of it tumbled into the sea every year, thanks to the terrible coastal erosion. The Tides Reach Caravan Park stood just on the other side of the road, and she could see how close to the edge of the cliffs some of the caravans were. She thought you'd have to be pretty brave to live in one of those, and surely it was time they were moved to safety. She supposed Gavin would see to it before the park reopened. He'd been fighting the battle against the hungry sea for a long time now, after all, and knew what he was doing. Bits of concrete rubble still littered this part of the beach, but even so, there was something about this broken beauty that tugged at her heart. She closed her eyes and breathed in the salty air, glad to be home. Smiling, she threw out her arms as if embracing the vast sky and the pounding waves. She felt freer than she had in months. This tiny village, with no more than 30 residences, filled her with hope and optimism somehow. As she opened her eyes, She felt tears pricking and wasn't sure if it was emotion that was overwhelming her or the salty sting of the sea carried on the increasingly gusty wind. She drove slowly back down Weltringham Road, noting the bare hedges that lined the route and the trees silhouetted against the blue sky, whose empty branches would, in a few short months, be lush and green and bursting with blossom. Ahead of her lay the Humber, the tidal estuary that fed into the sea. It was fast-flowing today, hurried along by the impatient wind. On the other side of the water, she could see the green banks of Lincolnshire. As she pulled up outside Sanderling's, she saw the net curtains twitch and smiled to herself. She'd known her man would be waiting at the window, eager for her arrival. No doubt the kettle would be boiling before Alison had even reached the front door. A broken arm wouldn't stop her man from making tea. She tapped lightly on the window, just to let them know she was about to enter the bungalow, although she had no idea why. Her parents had told her repeatedly not to bother. "Not like we'd be getting up to something, is it?" her mam had chortled. Even so, she felt it was the polite thing to do, although she never waited for a response. She pushed open the door into the hallway and, sure enough, she could hear the kettle, even from here. The door to the living room was open, welcoming her in. She took off her shoes, mindful of her mam's carpets, and headed into the surprisingly spacious room where she found her dad sitting in an armchair staring at a mobile phone. Alison gaped at him. "What are you doing with a phone?" she asked, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. Her mam had bought herself a phone a few years ago, although she hated using it and had never really got the hang of it, preferring to use the landline. Whenever she used it to text Alison, she would always sign it with "Love from Mum," as if Alison wouldn't know who the text was from, and the messages were as brief as possible. Dad, though, had refused point blank to entertain a mobile phone, so to see him sitting there with his eyes fixed on the screen of what looked to be a pretty up-to-date model was a shock. He briefly glanced up at her and said, "Hello, love. You made it, then?" before his attention switched back to whatever was so exciting on the screen. Mam bustled into the room. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, is he still on that thing?" Alison gently hugged her, aware of the arm that was encased in plaster and nestled in a sling. "Surely that's not Dad's," she murmured incredulously. "Oh, it is. After my little fall, our Christopher persuaded him to step into the 21st century in case of emergencies. That's Elaine's old phone, but it's still quite modern. Your father's hooked. He's got the internet and everything, although it's a bit sporadic round here. Ask him what he's doing. Go on, ask him." Alison glanced at her father. "What are you doing, Dad?" He didn't reply, his fingers jabbing at the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. She tried again. "Dad?" He looked up, bemused. "What? What are you doing?" "Oh," he shrugged. "A quiz." His gaze lowered again, and Alison turned back to her mother, who tutted in annoyance. "Would you believe he's answering a load of questions to find out which rabbit he'd be if he was a character in Watership Down? I ask you." "Oh, Dad." Alison couldn't help but smile. After all his criticisms of other people using their phones too much, he'd gone and fallen for that. "Cup of tea, love?" Mam asked. "Or would you prefer coffee? Mind, I haven't got one of them fancy machines like you have," she warned, as she did every time Alison visited. "Tea's fine, but I'll make it," Alison said, ignoring her mother's protestations that she was perfectly capable. "It would be your right hand," she said, eyeing her mother worriedly as she reached for the tea bags. "How are you managing, really?" "No problem at all," Mum said cheerfully. "I mean, it's a bit tricky doing some things, but I'm getting the hang of it. When you think about it, it's a blessing, really. I'm learning to use my left hand after all these years. Never too late to learn a new skill. Trust her mother to look on the bright side, Alison thought, as she headed to the fridge for milk. You couldn't keep her down for long. She wished she'd inherited a bit of her parents' resilience. Although not allowed to make the tea, Alison's mam soon dug out the biscuits and insisted on carrying the tin into the living room. Alison put a mug on the nest of tables beside her dad's chair, just as he put his phone away with a sigh. "I'm bigwig," he said. "Is that good?" "No idea," Mam replied. "I've never watched it." "Don't you know, Dad?" Alison asked, amused. "How would I know? I've never watched it either." "Not read the book?" she asked cheekily. He frowned. "Why would I read a book about bloody rabbits? I'm not 6. "Ignore him and have a custard cream," Mam said, reaching for a biscuit from the tin she'd brought in. "Aren't we going for lunch in the pub in half an hour?" Alison queried, checking the clock on the mantelpiece, which said 12:30. "Yes, but I haven't had any breakfast." "Why haven't you had any breakfast?" Alarm bells were ringing already. Mam liked a breakfast. "Are you sure you're managing?" "Rosie said Rosie's been good as gold, bless her," Mam assured her. "You don't have to worry about me, love. Everyone's falling over themselves to help out. Your auntie and uncle, Seb's lad, Sam. Anyway," she said dryly, "I've got your dad to look after me. What could possibly go wrong?" "I hope they've got chicken and mushroom pie on," Dad said hopefully. "I do love a chicken and mushroom pie." "See what I mean?" Mam beamed at Alison. "Never mind him. How was your birthday?" "Oh, I was working, so... Thanks for the card and the lovely necklace." She pulled gently at the chain around her neck, which had a gold coffee bean attached. "Very retro." "Is it? I just saw the coffee bean and thought of you with your passion for that machine of yours." Alison stifled a smile. It was hardly a passion. She maybe used it 4 or 5 times a month, but she supposed the thought was there. "Rosie was so good to pop it all across to yours when you couldn't make it last weekend. We were so disappointed." "Sorry, Mum. I was working on Sunday, and on Saturday I had to ferry the girls around because Jenna and Joel were both busy." "They work too hard," Mum said firmly. "And so do you, by the sound of it." She smiled suddenly. "How are Hallie and Ada? Haven't seen them for weeks." "Lively," Alison said wryly. "Too lively for you, especially with your broken arm." "Oh, don't be silly. We'd love to see more of them. You can bring them here every weekend, you know. We wouldn't mind at all, would we, Stan?" Dad frowned. "Would we what?" "Mind having Hallie and Ada here." "Who? Oh, no, of course not. I could take them to the beach. Show them the old battery. I'm sure they'd be fascinated." Alison and her mother exchanged doubtful looks, unable to imagine the twins having any interest at all in the battery. It wasn't only the broken road that littered the beach with bits of broken concrete and rubble, but also the remains of the old Goodfellow Battery, a First World War military fort which, during the Second World War, had been enlarged with a hospital, gun emplacements, searchlights, barracks, and officers' mess, most of which had been washed away by the sea, thanks to the appalling coastal erosion. What remained of it now, ironically, helped a little in the battle against that erosion, but it attracted attention from curious visitors and history buffs, and Alison had seen quite a few videos online of people who'd ventured inside the broken structure to film for their YouTube channel or social media sites. Somehow she doubted that 7-year-old twin girls would be as captivated. "You'll have to bring them next weekend if you're not working," Mam said. "Don't worry, I won't let your dad anywhere near them. Maybe," she added shrewdly, "you can leave them here. Have the weekend to yourself for once." "Mam, you've got a broken arm." "Oh, so what?" Her mother glanced down at her plaster-encased arm and sighed. "It's a bit of a nuisance, I must say, but I'm all right, really. Mind you, your dad's had to fasten the button on my jeans. I couldn't manage it with one hand. Speaking of which, Elaine and Christopher are coming to the pub to meet us, along with Rosie, so that'll be nice, won't it?" Alison frowned. "Why did you say, speaking of which, and go on about Elaine and Christopher when you were talking about the button of your jeans? Why do you think? You just watch our Elaine's face when she clocks me wearing jeans again. You know what she thinks about me dressing inappropriately for my age." She tutted crossly. "Honestly, she'd have me dress like an old woman if she had her way." Alison bit her lip. Her mum was 84. What age did she think you became an old woman? She smiled fondly at her mother, who was nibbling happily on a custard cream. She still insisted on having her hair coloured every 6 weeks at the salon in the village of Holderness, around 8 miles northwest of Kelsea Sands, covering the grey with a lovely ash blonde. She couldn't see a thing without her glasses, so had stopped wearing makeup, as she feared she'd end up looking like Lily Savage if she attempted it. But her skin wasn't in bad condition, since she'd always used moisturiser, and she dressed quite fashionably, despite her sister-in-law's disapproval. It was strange, but sometimes it seemed her mother was younger than Alison. How had that happened? Dad groaned. "I'm starving. Did you hear my belly rumble then?" he demanded. There was a beep from his phone, and he beamed in delight. "I've got a text message." "Oh," Mum said fondly. "His very first one. I'm so proud." "It's our Christopher," Dad announced. "They're already at the pub, and they want us to hurry up because they're hungry, and Rosie's already gone through 2 packets of crisps waiting." Alison laughed. "Sounds like our Rosie. Come on then, to the pub." Odd, but as she helped her mum into her coat, Alison suddenly felt a whole lot brighter. Chapter 3. As blue as the sky was, it was decidedly cold outside, and the 3 of them hurried up the road to the pub as fast as Mum and Dad could manage. They went past the front door of the North Star and round the side door, which, during the day, was the one everyone used. As they stepped inside, the familiar smell of beer, mixed with cooking smells from the kitchen, made them all relax instantly. Alison had forgotten how much she loved this place. "I'll get the drinks," Dad announced. "You make sure you get your mam settled, Alison. There's a good lass." Alison sent a cheery wave to Seb's lad Sam, who was behind the bar, and herded her mother through to the main room of the pub. The North Star had 2 sections. A large quiet bar room running the full length of the main building, where people could sit by one of the 2 fireplaces and maybe select a book from either of the bookcases, or head to a table by one of the bay windows and gaze out over the river. And the restaurant, which was mainly used during the evening or for private functions, or on exceptionally busy days. It was the only room that was carpeted. The bar room had its original slate floor. The North Star was a large square building with a more recent rear extension. It had been built in the mid-19th century after the old village of Kelsea tumbled into the sea and the residents moved closer to the Humber. A few decades ago, its red brick walls had been rendered and painted white, while the inside was cheerfully decorated in shades of cream and teal. It had polished oak tables and fittings, teal Drelon chairs and banquettes, a large bay window on one side of the front door, and 2 slightly smaller bay windows on the other, all giving glorious views across the estuary to Lincolnshire. On its walls were maps and images of the Holderness coast, photographs of past lifeboat crew members, and even an old lifebelt. It was warm and welcoming, and Alison's spirits lifted even further when she spotted the other members of her family sitting at a table by the window. Rosie waved frantically at them, as if she couldn't possibly see her otherwise, even though there was currently no one else in the bar. Christopher, a handsome, quiet man with receding, wiry grey hair and gentle eyes, got to his feet as they approached the table, ever the gentleman. Alison often thought that he, a retired old-school police inspector, was like someone from another age. Sometimes it was hard to believe that he was her dad's younger brother. Her uncle was calm, cool, thoughtful and sensible. Dad was not. What they had in common, though, was their kindness. They were both lovely men in their own way. Elaine, she noticed, gave Mam a searching look, no doubt storing the jeans, trainers and Paddington Bear sweatshirt in her mental filing cabinet as evidence to be relied upon at a later date. She hadn't worked all those years in admin at the police station in Millency for nothing. Short and stocky, with hair that was now more grey than the rose gold it had once been, she was wearing a very sensible dress and cardigan, as befitting a woman of 74. Christopher, at 76, was equally well dressed, in smart trousers, a shirt and tie, and a woolen sleeveless jumper. No one could ever accuse them of looking like they'd just rolled out of bed and thrown on the first things they could lay their hands on. As Alison's dad strolled up to the table with a tray of drinks in his hands, she noticed his baggy jogging bottoms and remembered that, under his coat, he was wearing a sweatshirt with a popular fashion logo partly obscured by a tea stain that he'd failed to remove properly that morning. She looked down at her ancient black leggings and old grey jumper, and then at Rosie in her skinny jeans and low-cut bright pink t-shirt, fingers adorned with rings, gold hoop earrings dangling from her earlobes, her eyelashes heavy with mascara and her lips pink and glossy, and wondered how two branches of the same family could be so different. "I thought you'd never get here," Rosie told her, without even waiting for her uncle to take off his coat. She grabbed the menus and began handing them out. Her father lifted an eyebrow. "Rosie," he said quietly. Rosie gave him a pleading look. "Yes, but I'm hungry." "But you're not starving," he said. "Let them get settled before you start haranguing them, for goodness sake." "Sorry, Dad," Rosie said meekly, giving Alison a sideways eye roll. "And I saw that," he added, his mouth twitching in amusement. Rosie laughed. All right, I get it. Behave yourself, Rosie." "Chance would be a fine thing," her mother said, shaking her head. "I think your brother must have got your share of the manners." To Rosie's credit, she didn't bite, although her mother had a habit of pointing out how saintly and wonderful Niall was. It had never bothered Rosie. Alison knew how much she loved her brother, and that she wasn't about to let her mother's uneven handouts of praise affect their relationship. Besides, Rosie realised her mum and dad adored her just as much. Her mum just had a funny way of showing it sometimes. "To be fair," Alison's dad said, handing her the Diet Coke she'd asked for and placing his wife's mango and pineapple juice in front of her, "I am starving, so I'll have one of them menus, Rosie, if you don't mind." "See?" Rosie said triumphantly, handing her uncle the menu as she gave her dad a smug look. "Not just me." Her father shook his head, but he was smiling. Elaine raised her glass. "To you, Alison. A belated happy birthday." Alison smiled as they all toasted her, resisting the urge to point out that she was far too old for birthdays, since she was actually the second youngest there. "Thank you," she said, "and thanks so much for the lovely presents and cards. I really appreciate them. I've messaged Niall and Kendra to thank them too." "They would have joined us," Elaine said, "but you know Sunday's a busy day for Niall." Niall, who at 46 was 3 years older than Rosie, was the vicar at St Saviour's Church in Millency, a small seaside town about 10 miles and a 20-minute drive up the coast. He and his wife Kendra lived in a modern vicarage with their 2 children, and it amused Alison and her mother no end how awed Elaine was, both by Niall's calling and by Kendra's support and commitment to his calling. Rosie had told them that whenever her brother and sister-in-law visited, her mam would buy fresh flowers for the sitting room, dust and hoover the house as if she was preparing it for a royal visit, and bake a cake, especially for the occasion. She puts a scented candle in the bathroom and all, she added. One day, I hope Kendra drops by unannounced. Mam'll die of shame. Chicken and mushroom pie, Dad said, passing his menu back along the table. Can't beat it. I don't know why you needed the menu, Mam said. It's all you ever want anyway. Are you not having a starter? Elaine asked. I'd rather have a pudding, Rosie told her. The rest of them nodded in agreement, causing Elaine's face to fall in clear disappointment, as if she couldn't possibly have a starter if the rest of them weren't. Gently, her husband pointed out that they had her favourite crème brûlée available, and maybe she preferred to skip a starter in favour of pudding after all, so the crisis was averted. He placed their orders at the bar and informed them that he'd ordered them all another round of drinks as well and had settled the bill. My treat, he added, holding up his hands as they protested. I insist. Everyone thanked him, and Alison's dad raised his glass in his brother's direction. Fair enough, he said comfortably. I'll get it next time, though. How's Jenna doing? Elaine asked, after taking a polite sip of her white wine. Well, I hope. Busy, Alison said. New term, back in the thick of it. And Joel? Oh, he's busy too, she admitted. It seems he's determined to end up running the world. He's always off doing some training course or other. I expect they just want what's best for the girls, Mam said comfortingly. Alison wondered what exactly was best for the girls. Surely having their parents at home a bit more would be preferable to finding out that their dad had got another promotion and their mum was hitting all her targets. What about their responsibilities to their daughters? She knew it was hard for modern parents and had every sympathy, but sometimes she felt that Joel and Jenna deliberately looked for reasons not to be available for the twins, although she'd never say so to her extended family. Well, except Rosie, but she didn't count. Niall and Ken...